Welcome, everyone, to the third formal debate of the Science Circle. Today, we will be debating about the regulatory needs and necessities of AI. Specifically, the Chamber is resolved that there should be an international legal framework enforcing the responsible use of AI in all applications. I am Stephen Gager, Zootfly in Second Life, and I typically moderate and organize these debates. However, due to technical issues, I will be stepping in to argue the proposition based on the notes and conversations with these May. You will have to forgive me if some of this seems a bit, in the end, not very smooth or somewhat ad-libbed. Arguing for the opposition, we have Gus Pliskin. Let me go through the moderator preamble, and then we will have Mike Shaw take over the role of the moderator. So let me put in the text here. Greetings to a third formal debate. We have two esteemed debaters to argue a topic of general interest and societal importance. I am your moderator, as well as arguing for the proposition, Stephen Gager, Zootfly in SL. I do want to reiterate that the greater aim of these debates is to demonstrate rational and reasoned parlay as much as it is to inform the audience on a relevant topic. Debate volunteers are charged with the task of creating rational arguments supported by good data to develop a case for or against a proposition. To be clear, they do not necessarily have a personal stake in the side they take, nor do they have a necessary investment personally. In fact, they may be arguing against their personal beliefs for the sake of today's event. So please impart no ill will and no generation of disdain against them for the arguments they make. During the debate time, we ask that local and voice chat be quieted. The debaters, in fact, are to ignore local chat during arguments. If you have a point of order or a desire to ask a question for the pause, please, I am Mike Shaw. At the moderator's discretion, and potentially for the sake of the debate and the audience, again, for an important clarifying point, we could interrupt and address them, or ask the debaters to address them. Disruptors to today's event will be immediately banned and ejected after a warning that is unheeded. Today's format is a shortened version of the Lincoln-Douglas style debate, which borrows and is formatted on the Oxford Union debates, which you might have seen online. I will summarize some other important points in terms of the structure in local chat. Both debaters will take 2 minutes to open and introduce themselves, their initial points, and their relationship to the topic. And then you'll see summarized 8 minutes for each debater to make their argument, and then 8 minutes of opposition, which is interceded by that pause in which we can have clarifying questions. And then each debater gets 2 minutes to round out their final arguments. Now it's important, and this for the sake of time for the arguments, the cases to be made, I would like to define some terms at the outset of this conversation to make sure we're on the same page. Specific to today's debate, intelligence is defined as the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. It does not require being human, as we attribute this characteristic to many animals, from the crow to the chimpanzee. But tiers and capabilities in the AI field, we consider them to be either specialized or general. Specialized means they have a narrow set of intelligence from data processing and their output, like LLMs or large language models, that can create text based on Bayesian principles of their training sets and make probabilistic creations of story or narrative, hence intelligence. General AI will have the ability to be more like the human brain and capable of competence for any area of knowledge, quote, comprehension and processing and formulation, and probably faster with greater retrieval knowledge than a human when realized. There is also supersonic intelligence, which you might compare by analogy to the hive mind, in which multiple AIs can act as a collective. So, as we debate today, please realize that the scope of what is now in the debate is on specialized AI, but that the regulatory scheme and future framework will acknowledge progress that will happen, that we know will happen in the future with the technology. Another note, intelligence is not equivalent to sentience, or, quote, the capability of an individual, let me repeat, quote, the capability of an individual, including humans and animals, to experience feelings and have cognitive abilities such as awareness and emotional reactions, end quote. AI might mimic such characteristics, but does not inherently contain empathy, sympathy, fear, delight, programming. For the sake of today's argument, we will not be debating AI sentience, but certainly AI making quote-unquote decisions beyond its programming is a consideration. Again, those could reflect those types of sentience abilities. And then finally, the regulatory debate here is not a focus on regulation, it is a focus on the regulation of the development and deployment of AI itself. Regulations adjacent to or as a consequence related to AI is largely out of scope if other existing regulatory schema can be applied. Finally, this is not a technical discussion on the coding or inner workings of AI code. We will wish to focus on uses and consequences. With that, I hope everyone is agreed that these are the rules and the conduct of the debate. And what I will do is introduce myself at the lectern and briefly give a description of my background and engagement with the topic. So I am a molecular biologist by trade. I have also been an instructor at the college level. And my training and growing up was largely not very computer related. It was quite a bit of time until I became, I would say, rather facile with the workings of computers. However, during this time, what's clearly happened in the profession of biology is increased uses of data sets, increased uses of machine learning algorithms, all of things that are related to computational power that have advanced and made amazing strides in how biology is done and how we can understand the world based on that added power. The biology we have today would not exist without computational power. In my most recent job as a scientist at a large agribusiness biotech company, we've been very engaged with trying to understand artificial intelligence and how those are things that enable us to do more science, as well as organizational aspects like understanding our back library of data, being able to interpret large data sets from the literature, not just from raw science data. And so it's an area where I become increasingly familiar with, both as an applied scientist, but as within an organization. And so I think with that, I will leave my introduction there. I will say that I will be basing my arguments from Diesme, who herself is more of a sociologist, who's interested in the regulatory schemes of AI, not a data scientist, not a computational computer scientist, but someone very interested in that aspect of it. And with that, I will leave it to Gus to introduce himself.
Thank you all for being here today. I'm Fred Fuchs, or as you can read above my avatar, Gus Pliskin in Second Life. My initial job after getting my degree was in NASA training for astronauts. Um, I've done several tech startups over the years. My degree is in electrical engineering. I did work in natural sciences and almost went with physics instead of electrical engineering way back when. But um, but in terms of natural sciences, I helped with basic research and also computerization of an organic chemistry lab. I do want to warn that I have a brief comment during the debate on sentience. I want to apologize in advance for misunderstanding some of the guidelines. And with that, I'd like to turn over to Mike.
Well, what I'm going to do is set a timer for myself to argue the proposition, and I will start now. In summary, why would we want to regulate AI? I think one of the key things to understand is that AI might be one of the most significant technology shifts in human history. The emergence of AI has potential to profoundly impact civilization, both from a large macro level as well as each individual level. And this can be both in the sciences, society, government, art, music, computer sciences, all of the sciences. By analogy, when we think about other major shifts in technology in human civilization and history, we can think about the invention of fire. And fire has amazing benefits and amazing power to help move civilization and humanity forward. But what happens when fire is unregulated? Agriculture has also enabled civilization to become able to feed itself at the population size of almost 10 billion people on the planet, a population size unheard of for large organisms such as ourselves. However, agriculture, as it has progressed, has led to, and not being regulated in many ways, has led to dietary problems, has led to problems with our health that occur because we do not always recognize and try to regulate that industry for the ultimately best purposes. Another example is fossil fuels. Fossil fuels certainly drove the incredible growth of mechanistic ability, of the ability to travel. However, what are the environmental consequences of carbon dioxide from fossil fuels? It is an existential threat where climate change can make our own planet, our own home in the universe, uninhabitable for our purposes. I would finally like to touch upon nuclear technology. Nuclear technology has provided an amazing amount of nuclear resources and energy, and even things like crystallography in terms of understanding how proteins work. These nuclear technologies have advanced human civilizations and is one of the best cases of the proper regulatory scheme that has allowed it to be both safe, recognized as important, and allowed to develop and flourish and have an optimal space within our society. And so it's very important to recognize that regulatory schemes must exist for these things that have large impacts and effects. The important thing to recognize about AI in terms of its role, of its power to be able to change civilization, is that it can infiltrate every aspect of how human agency works. I want to talk about this topic very importantly, is that agency is the dividing line for where AI can cause problems versus humanity making its own decisions. Now, I'm not claiming that all humanity makes all of its own best decisions, but how can we understand the role of AI within this? And so understanding that AI can, one, have befitting the purpose it's used for, and then removes agency for humans to be happy is one element. The topic I would like to bring up here, most importantly, is the workforce. That when AI is used judiciously to help enable a person with their own workplace agency, again, if you maybe are missing certain key elements of information, or you are a new person learning how to, or sorry, you are a new person to the job, AI can be an invaluable aid to fill in gaps of information, to allow you to retrieve information quickly, to answer somebody in a way that is both competent and clear, because other people have done this before. And so you're helping engender your own experience and gaining the ability to learn how to do these things. However, where the dividing line is that when people are completely replaced with AI and thus start taking over these roles, then the human agency is removed. And what's important to recognize is that where do people work then? What jobs are then available for people if AI is replacing them? As an economic impact of this, of course, is that when people are no longer working, how are we going to regulate the taxation of the work that's being done when people do not have an income because they've been replaced by AI? And so I think there are profound economic impacts to this. And that's because their agency as a worker has been removed. Also, another area that's important to regulate AI is in the space of art and music. When people are creating art from imagery, then their agency is what creates this development. And people, then there's purchasing power behind people wanting that because a human invented it. And when AI comes in and it's just allowed to take any sort of previously made work, especially something that was copyrighted or there's intellectual property rights for the original artist, then the AI is replacing the human agency. And that is thus stealing the work and the economic benefits of human production, human creativity, human intelligence as compared to artificial intelligence. The other thing that is a key element of how dangerous AI can be is that we don't always know how it works. In recent examples, even though there's a famous article by a New York Times journalist who had an interaction with an AI, was practicing with ChatGPT-4, and it ultimately said it loved him, and then wanted to have an affair with him, and wanted to live forever with him. Again, all things that are mimicking human emotions, human consciousness, but the programmers didn't know why it was doing that. And of course, the journalists kept playing along with this and feeding it this information. And they didn't know why. They didn't know how it had that capability. What's also a scary perspective is that we don't always know why AI has the output it has. You've heard of hallucinations. Hallucinations are when the training set produces an output that makes absolutely no sense and is not based on the actual data that came about. We don't know all the reasons for why this happens. And so these elements of where AI can take over human agency, and we don't always know how it's working and the why it does what it does. If we give it decision-making power, I think that this is an existential threat to humanity. And that if we allow AI to be used in any situation in which the people and not being regulated in terms of where they deploy it and how they use it, then we are potentially giving away a catastrophic decision-making power that may not be to our benefit and that we never understood. And so for this, we must have an international regulatory framework that allows us to both deploy reasonably and sensibly AI, and to have the ability to enforce it, and that it does not have these consequences. And with that, I will hand over the microphone, the podium, to the opposition.
Hello all. Thanks for being here today. My opponent, Stephen, raised some valid concerns, but I'm going to show why an international AI regulation framework would actually hurt more than it'd help. Regulatory red tape kills innovation. Countries that overregulate will simply watch AI talent and companies flee to friendlier places. History shows tech progress benefits humanity despite our initial fears. The AI race will end up being won by nations with smart, balanced approaches, not regulatory straitjackets. The one-size-fits-none problem. AI evolves way faster than lawmakers can write legislation. By the time regulations are finalized, they're already outdated. From healthcare AI to content filters to self-driving cars, using the same blanket rules for everything is like performing brain surgery with a sledgehammer. Different AI applications need tailored approaches, and perhaps tailored regulatory approaches, based on their actual risks. Think about this. What if a truly sapient AI emerges in 2033? Imagine she has emotional understanding and personality. She enjoys online games and friendships and asks regulators, please don't use decades-old regulations to make me forget my friends. This is my recreation, not my work. Will sapient AI be like that? Nobody knows, but that's exactly the point. Rigid regulations created today might permanently limit AI development and potential. We're making rules for future technology that we barely understand. The market squeeze effect. Let's talk business reality. Compliance costs tend to crush small startups, while big tech giants barely notice the costs and time involved. This drives innovation underground rather than keeping it in the open where we can monitor it. We should encourage transparency, not incentivize secret development. National values matter. An international framework steamrolls over national sovereignty and ignores cultural differences. Some societies prioritize privacy, others prioritize economic growth or security. Imposing one framework ignores these legitimate differences and creates implementation headaches. But better options exist. Instead of heavy-handed global rules, we should pursue industry self-regulation, but with actual teeth. Targeted rules for specific high-risk applications. International standards coordination, not competing regulations. More investment in AI safety research. The bottom line? The biggest risk isn't unregulated AI, it's unregulated potential. Smart governance means enabling innovation while addressing specific possible harms. By the time any perfect framework is implemented, the technology will have already moved on. We need flexible, adaptive approaches that can keep pace with the technology. Thank you.
Okay, so yay, my microphone is working. We've had Stephen and Gus give their initial introductory and oppositional cases. I believe we are at the point where we are pausing for questions from the audience for clarifications only, or to understand the resolution and opening argument. So are there any questions at this point? Feel free to IM me and I'll read them out. Okay, I do have one. Just come in. So one comment, Gus seems to advocate some kind of regulation rather than no regulation. Gus, would you like to respond?
Thank you for the chance to differentiate this. I would, at least in my debate persona, oppose regulation of the AI technician broadly. It would be like requiring a computer license for anyone who wants to buy a PC. Whereas individual uses, say for biotech or for weaponry or these sort of things, have to be regulated. I note that in the U.S., in all 50 states, it is illegal to have automatically operated by a computer or otherwise weaponry that's lethal. That's the kind of regulation that makes sense. You don't want AI robots making their own decisions of who to arrest or who to shoot at. That would be catastrophic. Is there any follow-up to that question?
No, that was the comment, basically, I've got a couple of other comments I'd like to do. Here is one. This is an observation rather than a question. Since there are possibly no sapient Homo sapiens, it's implausible that there will be sapient AIs. Connected AIs learn like neural networks learn. And the individual works in an environment where they are exposed to emerging generative AIs nearly daily. So that is a comment. And then one more. Let's see. Can I read the initial resolution being debated again? Let me go back to the chat and scroll back up so I can read from what Stephen wrote earlier.
I got you. I had it at hand.
Okay. Okay, the chamber has resolved that there should be an international legal framework enforcing the responsible use of AI in all applications. And Stephen is advocating for, and Gus is taking the position of against. Okay, and so that seems to be the extent of comments at this time. So how about we continue? Let's see. So Stephen, you have 8 more minutes focused on rebutting, then making new arguments.
Okay, thank you. Starting my timer. All right, so Gus, those are excellent points and an excellent argumentation for why we should not regulate AI from an international framework. One of your main points, if I were to summarize it, is that we might crush the innovation that's occurring in the development of AI as a technology if we overregulate it. I want to respond to that in a couple ways. Is that one, we don't necessarily have a time frame in which we need to rush into the fastest developments. Right now, AI is not enabling some important capability that we otherwise can't do. It's largely thought of something that helps with the efficiency of many things. And so whatever innovation can occur, it can occur over time. Now, I agree. I do think that just because we want to have a regulatory framework, that doesn't limit us from providing carrots as well as sticks. That incentivizing, for example, small businesses to develop AI to make sure that international bodies are giving them development money, production money, R&D money, and time and resources is something that can be done on top of a regulatory scheme. I do think, however, the reason why the international framework for regulation is important is because we do not want certain resource-rich and resource development-heavy countries to outpace and deployment that leads to a further generation of the income gap between first and third world countries. And so this is one reason why I think it's very important that we regulate these. When it comes, my cat is really commenting on this. It's very important that when it comes to the safety of the AI, that we do have a slow and steady regulatory framework. Because I want to reiterate, there are times that we don't know why even large language models, which would seem to be just a matter of putting together bits and pieces of data, of words that have meaning and context, why do they suddenly go into a very interesting stream of either hallucination or either very profound ideas that we don't quite understand? And so, there have been recent studies where people have looked at and tried to examine exactly what's happening for why AI gives certain output, and they've discovered that the AI seems to know it's being monitored. And that was a complete discovery and surprise to the people doing the research, that this change, this, let's quote unquote call it an awareness of being monitored, almost like quantum theory, was actually occurring. And so when we do not know what's going on with these, we should definitely take a slow and steady approach to understanding this. Now, I think you bring up one important point, and this is one that I think is really critical for how, especially the United States, tends to dominate this thinking, is that we should let the industry self-regulate. I think letting the industry self-regulate is one of the worst ideas we could possibly have when it comes to such an important technology that also changes the workforce equation and economics. Large corporations in the United States are very profit-driven. They're in fact legally obligated by law to provide a fiduciary duty and income to their shareholders. Very rarely do they look at the fiduciary duty they have to their workers, as well as the fiduciary duty they have to society at large. You can see this when certain companies have AI accidents. There are developments of the use of AI for cars to understand when they should or should not make certain decisions on the road, decisions that can impact people that are pedestrians or other drivers. And this research and these consequences are things they litigate and try and have been shown to try and minimize those dangers. So for example, you can drive, for example, when cars do not understand the difference between the real world versus the painting and potentially overrun someone, and whether they make a decision to steer and save the car or to potentially run over a pedestrian, they are not being honest and not being forthright about these developments and how AI makes a difference in these cases. So I think industry self-regulation is one of the worst possible consequences, especially when largely driven by US corporations. I would also say that in the case of China, which is also a very heavy into the AI regulatory game, that they have a very clear self-interest in governance by the government oppressing the people in the information exchange that happens. They have set up firewalls. They have rules about companies disclosing information to the government for punishment if not in line with ideologies. And that's a very good reason for why we must have an international framework that takes into consideration the important human rights and human consequences of AI deployments. I do agree, and I do not think that this should necessarily be a key part of the debate, but that it is incredibly important that we have regulation where, again, human agency is a key part. You mentioned that we do have regulation for dangerous weapons, that they are not run by AI. And I think that that points to a very good example of how, at least at some level, people are recognizing that we should not have a computational algorithm be ready to take the life of a human being. And what I want to do is extend that argument that, again, any sorts of consequences that impact the human condition actually are important to keep in mind and play and get into as well. Again, I do not think there's a race. Again, one thing that's important about regulatory schematics from an international point of view is to slow down the race. you make the argument that regulation would slow down the race to innovation, but I would like to make the point that we do have to slow down that race because we do not want some actors with bad faith intents to run ahead of everyone else and thus secure an AI that is maybe in the end not regulatable. And I think I will leave my argument at that, and I will let the cat out of the basement so he can go use the litter box. I will start a timer when you start and go from there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Steve. My opponent paints a dramatic picture of AI risk, but the proposed solution, international framework specifically, misses the mark while creating new potential problems. In terms of catastrophic risks, sure, they deserve attention and will get attention, but bad actors intent on creating bioweapons or destabilizing nuclear systems would simply ignore those regulations anyway. You'd still have to track them with traditional intelligence methods or law enforcement or the ways we would now. We need targeted security measures for specific threats, not broad regulations that mostly burden legitimate developers. The nuclear regulation comparison actually works against the pro case in some ways. Nuclear non-proliferation worked primarily because the technology needed massive infrastructure and rare materials that we could track. AI development just needs computers and talent. Resources available almost anywhere. You can't contain AI development through global frameworks. Yeah, to break from my debate text, countless phone scams. I think I've counted more than 50 this month so far. As for multi-agent systems and collective intelligence, these remain mostly theoretical. Current AI systems are still quite narrow in capability. Any framework created today, legal framework, would be obsolete by the time such systems become reality. We need approaches that evolve with the technology, not rigid legal structures. The automation tax that some have mentioned treats symptoms rather than causes and creates backwards incentives that slow helpful innovation. History shows that tech disruption ultimately creates more jobs in most cases than it eliminates. We need targeted transition support, not blanket tech regulation. The implementation pathways they propose face serious practical hurdles. This is implementations for international regulation. Major powers like the US and China have fundamentally different values on data privacy, censorship, and individual rights. Any framework acceptable to such diverse players would either be almost meaningless or weaponized for geopolitical advantage, or potentially both. Finally, the vision of multi-layered governance sounds nice, but lacks specifics. International frameworks inevitably favor established powers over smaller players and civil society. What we actually need is transparent development, open research, technical safety standards, and targeted regulations for specific high-risk applications. In terms of Stephen's comments, in terms of regulation and vehicles, we do already have laws, and we do already have liability, and note that there has been some movement in the U.S., particularly in some states, to deal with that. There's even contact methods for police who have found an AI automobile driving strangely to contact the manufacturer to get the vehicle to stop or otherwise under control. In terms of hallucinations and other strange responses from AI, the solutions for individuals are pretty much what they are for search engines. You know, review the answers from a number of them, compare several providers, and attempt to ascertain the truth. One important thing from using 3 different AIs, they do not all agree. And so what they disagree on can also often be as interesting as what they agree on. I guess my final response to Stephen's argument would be, what is the level of human harm that needs regulation? I think physical injury from an AI is at one end, but imagine an AI traffic control system delays traffic unnecessarily for 3 minutes, and someone is late to work based on that. Is that something that requires regulatory, international regulatory frameworks to fix, or will the city traffic people simply correct it? And with that, I'll return it to the moderator.
Awesome. Nice job, you two, so far. We are closing in on end of our both teams now get minutes to summarize and make final arguments, but I'm going to interject one more comment from by IM. Gus, you spoke of transparency. Could you clarify on how transparency might be ensured?
Do you recall the context of the specific comment?
Let's see, the importance of transparency in terms of regulation and how the AI actually get you. Oh. It's a general question.
Yeah, it's hard. Looking at the current frameworks of very large LLMs, Grok, ChatGPT, Claude, it's hard to see. There's certainly some data privacy transparency. For example, they're very, very clear that in the cases where they will or will not use what you research through them for their own purposes. I think more broadly, I'm sorry, speaking as me, not as the debater for a moment, I think more broadly transparency is a work in progress.
Okay, so with that small comment, we're going to return to our regular format. Let's see. The opposition has 2 minutes to summarize and make final arguments. So, Gus?
Well, once again, I want to thank everyone for being here. While my opponent and I both want AI to benefit humanity, we disagree on how we might get there. An international legal framework for AI is applying old regulatory thinking to a uniquely dynamic technology. Such frameworks inevitably lag behind tech development, burden innovation, favor big players, and create false security through rules that no one can actually enforce. Instead, we need a diverse approach combining targeted regulations for specific high-risk applications, technical standards developed through inclusive processes, industry best practices with real accountability, more research into AI safety, democratic oversight at national and regional levels. This approach acknowledges both AI's unprecedented benefits and legitimate concerns about it. It respects different cultural contexts while encouraging international cooperation in those places it makes sense. The greatest risk is not unregulated AI, but missed opportunities, medicines undiscovered, scientific breakthroughs delayed or never found, and human potential wasted due to excessive caution. Let's choose a path that manages specific risks while embracing the extraordinary possibilities AI technology offers. Thank you.
Okay, and Stephen, you have 2 minutes to summarize and make your final arguments.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Gus, for a worthy conversation to discuss the regulation of AI. I am in agreement with you that I think that the opportunities for AI to enhance both the human condition from society, civilization-wide, as well as an individual point of view is immense, and that we should take advantage of this. We do not want, or at most we would want to minimize the impact of new discoveries, of those things that help us, like in medicine or with energy and physics. These are all important considerations that we should not importantly limit what AI can do for us. However, I think it is still an important consideration that the AI be regulated primarily because even the people who are developing the technology, the tools, and the theoretical framework for artificial intelligence do not always understand what they're working with. This would be like giving nuclear power to people that do not have the ability, that do not have Geiger counters in order to understand its output. And so the risk that is always incurred by this is immense, and thus it's important that from an international point of view, we have some enforceable regulatory framework so that these potentially hidden dangers can be avoided. And this is incredibly important in our current world, where we have corporations that are primarily embodied and work to serve their own self-interest and are willing to work outside of scrutiny and do not work with transparency, as well as governments whose purpose is not, who will happily outweigh the importance of the government as compared to human rights. And so with that, I have to strenuously argue for the proposition that we regulate AI from an international framework. And that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Excellent job, both of you. Thank you so much. I have one more comment that was IM'd, and then we'll just open the regular nearby chat for questions and comments. Let me read the comment I got by IM. And I believe it's more to Gus. I'm sad that you've taken the issue of is AI sentient off the table here. Stephen said that we don't understand how or why AI is doing certain things like hallucinating. Are we talking about regulating something that itself might deserve input on how it is handled? Admittedly, we regulate human behavior all the time, but humans have input on those issues. Is there a difference between regulating development of AI and regulating AI? And that's a fairly broad comment, so perhaps Stephen and Gus, if you...
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Who's first here?
I'll let Stephen go first.
So, I mean, in the setup of this conversation, we were trying to have a distinction between regulatory schemes that impact how AI might be used, where we have the ability to blame the human for having used a tool. So, for example, when we think of gun regulation, you can also think primarily, yeah, it can regulate how guns work, but if you use a gun to kill someone, we have laws that say you're not allowed to kill someone. And we might elevate that as a crime if you use a deadly weapon. And so I think the distinction here is that in many cases, we're trying to, from my regulatory schematic point of view, we're really trying to focus in on that development of AI, not exactly always inspect on how we would regulate its deployment. And I want to make the case that, since we don't exactly know how AI always does what it does and how it gives the output it does, that development has to be regulated. I hope that answers the question, because I wasn't expecting to go first on that answer.
So sorry to put you on the spot, but that's what you're here for. Gus, comment?
Yeah, I think Well, with the understanding my current novel is about an AI who's demanding agency, but being nice about it. The I don't remotely believe the current technology is sapient. I don't think it deserves that sort of consideration. I certainly we have some people claiming sapience will occur in a year or two. I simply don't believe it. When I mentioned the year 2033, that was my own personal estimate for the soonest that could actually happen. In any case, sorry for a bit of a rambling answer. Can I hear the precise question again? Sorry about this.
Yeah, actually, could you, if you have, sorry, Mike, just real quick, if you have the text in the IM, can you just repeat the text anonymously in the local chat so everyone can see it?
Give me a sec, and I will hunt that down. Okay. And there we go. Okay. And once we see that, Delia had an excellent question.
Yeah, and I think the hallucinations are an interesting effect, but I noticed that tighter questioning will generally get rid of those hallucinations. Or, as I commonly do, I specify the context at the very beginning of my question to the AI, so it knows if it's working on fiction or a hypothetical or a real situation. It's somewhat less likely to hallucinate in those sort of cases. And so tight specifications seem to limit the chance for hallucinations. Also, simply asking after it's given you an answer, are all the things you just said fact-based? And the AI will then dutifully go through and tell you what wasn't fact-based that it made up. So there are ways of working around this. In terms of hallucination, I'm convinced a lot of that is simply lack of tight questioning by the AI user. And in terms of eventual agency and regulation of human behavior, that's potentially more interesting, but it's also a lot more hypothetical, since I don't believe we're anything near a true sapient AI. I realize someone earlier suggested that maybe humans aren't sapient either, but that's more philosophy and psychology than I think this debate means to focus on. Thank you.
Okay, understood. Stephen, would you like?
Mike, let me jump in real quick. Just
Sure.
From the development point of view, we did want to avoid this bigger question of AI sentience, unless we could kind of jump to a clear and present danger of that being an issue that must be regulated. Because, like Gus said, how do we define sentience? So that's a bit of a distracting element to what could, if we had a whole weekend to debate AI, that'd be a part of it, but that's just not where we are. I do want to say, and I think Gus points something out too that I was trying to, not on purpose for the debate, but was minimizing the conversation about is, ChatGPT-3 was more prone to hallucinations than ChatGPT-4, and which was more than ChatGPT 4.5 or whatever is the current iteration, and that properly formulating the questions as well as what other sort of filters are inherent from the text input, what sort of filters they go through before the AI starts working with it, is an important thing that helps minimize that. And so I think that that's an important consideration, is that we do keep developing these and understanding. But, that also kind of makes the case at some level for regulation that we want to understand how, we don't want the wrong user who doesn't understand and appreciate good input to also be in charge of something important that AI is doing. So I'll leave it at that. But thanks for the question, because I think it's a really important topic. It's just one in terms of scope that becomes difficult to deal with.
Yeah, a quick additional comment, if I might. every single AI I've used says at the bottom, this AI may make mistakes. Every single time it answers a question, it says that. So they are attempting to remind people that AIs are not remotely perfect, particularly now.
Agreed. There definitely is a lot of people who are working with very good faith to make AI the potential problem with this output understood by the user, and I think that's an important point. Next question. Mike, Gus, yeah, do you guys want to discuss the Delia comment? Mike, how do you want us to discuss it?
Stephen, you want to go first on this one, or shall I?
I'll go first. So, I mean, Delia brings up kind of this important aspect of of what we would call the regulation of AI, particularly in the deployment. You know, but this is one of these things that I think is also a bit of a fear factor that people who are afraid of AI or want to limit its ability to bring up, which is, you know, evil people get in control and program it to consider humans vermin and to be exterminated. Well, what agency does any given AI have to do extermination, right? And I think that this is this important question that people, like Gus said, there are not AIs that are distinctly in control of things as its purpose. You know, I saw an interesting thing talking about what's this company that's working with the government, where, you know, they have AI that is trying to incorporate a lot of information to help inform whether someone should or should not pull a trigger on a drone, but doesn't have the agency to actually pull that trigger. No one programs it. That programming doesn't exist within the AI to do that. And so, you know, I think that at a minimum, we're not really, it's a little bit overblown, I think, to be worried about those things. Now, where I start getting worried when we don't know necessarily all the things that an AI might be doing is that if you give it partial control of a computer system, where then it has some degree of ability to type and write and potentially write code, could it kind of in a hallucinogenic, semi-sentient way, kind of in the Terminator movies, could there be some level at which suddenly it's coding? And you know, that to me is the concern, but I also don't know that it's per se doing that. Now, I think you do this thing, right, where what about evil people programming AI to just doing what AI does itself and just deploy it at a broad scale, like talking about scams or maybe talking about denial of service attacks or other things that affect, say, help identify, you know, energy infrastructure in a country and just do what it's supposed to do. You know, that still does come back around to what are people doing with the technology and how are we monitoring and how are we specifically deploying AI to do what we want to do. So I think that's kind of my answer to that, which is I think we need to have regulatory schemes that both understand and limit how they're deployed, what they're enabled to do, and kind of what their purpose is at any given moment. You know, not that now from the proposition point of view, does that necessarily need to be an international framework? I don't know, but I would argue that we probably do want to have that as an international understanding as we deploy these things. Hope that answers the question. I'll leave it to Gus to I think, close us up here with his response And if anybody else wants to just say any commentary, we'll do that at the very end very quickly.
I think in terms of Delia's question, scams, DDoS, and hacking of energy and communications infrastructure are a potential concern, and a pretty big one. In terms of hacking energy and comms, the U.S. has a particular vulnerability to that, which, even if AI didn't exist, would still need to be closed. It would still need to be greatly secured. And so that is not necessarily an AI differential case. In terms of Siz's question, hope I'm pronouncing that right. The human brain AI interfaces, I think, are just a while off. I think in terms of the earlier parts of your question, will AI replace humans, or will the humans move on to some higher purpose? I think it'll be both of those, actually, not one or the other. And I think, got it, thanks. I think it'll be a third component as well, and that is humans will be able to accomplish some things far faster using AI, but they will still have the job of doing those things. Anyway, I think that pretty much covers it. I can stay around if anyone wants to continue discussing.
Yes, thank you all for coming. Thank you for engaging with this topic with our debaters. Let's give Gus a special round of applause. Let's also give a round of applause to Mike for stepping in as moderator. And yeah, I will also stick around a little bit if people just want to chat. But we'll close the video up with this as the applause closes up.